morning. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
Um, we have a lot to talk about today. I know that the memorandum of understanding has kind of fallen apart, unfortunately. I know we were very excited about that the past few weeks about the proposed peace that was going to happen, but fortunately, we're here back again. And we're going to talk about how that will roll into the midterms that are a few months away in November. So I want to go ahead and kick it off to you. I know that we have some other topics that we want to get into, but we really want to start off with kind of updating everyone on the war and where that kind of puts us in the election.
Yeah. Well, what has happened? Really, the struggle is over control of the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranian people are really determined that they are going to control the Strait of Hormuz, and they're going to tax the, or charge a fee or whatever for the ships that pass through. And this will, be enormous power for Iran if they can do it. The United States, there is a principle of, freedom of navigation in these straits, and there are various ones over in different parts of the world. But in theory, these things are supposed to be free and open. Now, who enforces that rule is a matter of who's got the power to do it. And so anyway, the U.S. tried working with Oman. They have one side of the strait, and we tried to slip some ships through using the waters that are closest to Oman, and the Iranians balked at that. They intercepted several ships. There was one liquid natural gas ship. I think it was from Qatar. Anyway, it was significantly damaged. They fired drones or whatever. Nobody knows exactly, but they hit them with something and did significant damage. And then they also attacked two other ships. And at that point, the flow of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz has been paralyzed. So we're sort of back where we started. The U.S. retaliated. President Trump authorized attacks, and we bombed another 100 sites or so. And so the game goes on. But one way or the other, I mean, we certainly, gave them a big punch in the nose, but they control the strait, and that's really the issue. He who controls the strait wins this war, and so that's where we stand. So,
well, I have a viewer put in a question, and I think it kind of we talk about that is, can we end this war without regime change in Iran? Is kind of what they wanted to ask you, Senator.
Well, and that is a good question. The answer to it isn't entirely direct. The fact is, we cannot bring about a regime change. And we're going to talk about the funeral procession, and that will address that issue as we go along. Maybe this would be a good time just to
that'd be a good segue into that. That we talked about this a few, I would say probably about a month ago, and this has been happening for so long, that the funeral arrangements were happening right around the 4th of July. So that kind of signaled to me that maybe there was this positive push towards peace, because we talked about the funeral procession for General Soleimani, how that was bombed. And so the Iranians were very suspicious about getting people together in large crowds to commemorate their Khomeini if they were under threat that there would be a terrorist attack, for lack of better terms. That's what it would be, targeting civilians, at a moment of solace, and when they're trying to memorialize someone that they cared more for. So that kind of signaled to me that, yeah, hopefully that there was going to be this peace, because they were going to go forward with these funeral. But we saw, even though that the war, peace negotiations were on shaky grounds, you had millions come out for the funeral of the Soleimani. Yeah. So we can talk about that and maybe where that stands. If we want to look at regime change, I would say, what happened in Iraq, where what does regime change technically look like? Does it put the country in a better position than what we, told, basically subscribed our soldiers, say, hey, we're going to liberate these people? Did it bring true liberation, or did it allow room for a power vacuum where you had more violent, nefarious actors take hold and be able to garner support?
Yeah, the war began after Netanyahu I think, had just deliberately deceived the United States into this bizarre notion that somehow the nation of Iran, it's not a small country, it's a mid-sized country, population of 91,000 or 91 million, I'm sorry. And Netanyahu had a network of Mossad agents inside of Iran, and they passed out weapons and so forth. And these were sacrificial lambs. Netanyahu, he didn't care. He knew these people were all going to die, but he generated some protests and so forth, and then he distributed the weapons. There was sort of an armed uprising that consisted of Mossad spies and their agents and a lot of perhaps well-meaning people who thought, well, okay, the West is saying that the government's going to topple. There were about 3,000 people killed. The numbers ballooned and ballooned and ballooned, and now you hear administration officials talk about 42,000. From what I can tell, and I've researched and looked through AI and so forth, I tend to agree with Colonel McGregor on this, that there's very little evidence to support these high numbers, but there were several thousand who died in this attempted uprising, but it was enough to create the illusion that there was this tremendous force for a change of government. Now, there is no doubt that at least before all of this war started, there was a significant opposition to the people in power. Didn't mean that people wanted a revolution, but it did mean that it's sort of like, the Democrats want a change in government. They want to get rid of Trump. It doesn't mean some of them do want a revolution, but in general, it means
they wouldn't want it to be at the behest of a foreign country bombing them. I feel like that's kind of appropriate to say, because I feel like any country that happens to, you really have this rallying of us versus them, where you kind of find more common ground as you being an American, versus kind of more of an organic revolution.
So going back to the question that we received, can we resolve this without regime change? I think it's important to recognize there will not be a regime change. The funeral for the Ayatollah Khamenei, who was assassinated by the Israelis, they are extremely good at these mass murder situations, and they killed him. They killed lots of other civil officials. And so,
which I mean, I think it's worth noting that he was a religious leader. So it was more of akin to us bombing the Pope or another country bombing the Pope. How would that kind of be viewed as towards the people who, are devoutly Catholic? So I think that's important to know. Yeah.
I think under international law, I don't think that the killing of civil officials is condoned. You can assassinate military officials, but the Ayatollah was a civil official, and he was a religious official. Because it is a theocracy there. There's a blending of him being the highest religious official, but also being the overall top official of government. So he fills the same role that President Trump fills, or President Putin fills. But the importance of this funeral. The funeral took about a week, and the coffin was carried through 5 major Iranian cities, and the magnitude of the funeral was gargantuan. The Iranian officials say that this was the largest event in world history, and they claim that as many as 43 million people would be, roughly half of their population took part. Whether you accept their numbers, and they laid out some of the ways in which they measured the numbers, and I suspect they did it, realistically. Even if you believe that the number is half that, I think independent observers recognize, no one denied that this was a gargantuan turnout. Now, I think it was not only people just mourning the Ayatollah, but it was a demonstration of Iranian unity and the power behind the existing structure there. Now, what's happened is the civil officials, because we assassinated the civil officials, the civil element of the government has been diminished, and the Islamic Republican Guard has expanded. So there's been a shift in the way that the government functions, but the government there is absolutely in firm control. There is zero possibility that this government will be changed. So we can, we can attempt to defeat them militarily and force them to open up the strait, or we can compromise in some way. But this notion, it was first floated by the Israelis, and I have no doubt Netanyahu knew with certainty that there was no possibility that the government would be overthrown. I think that was simply a ploy to convince President Trump that, yeah, he ought to join in, and maybe we can topple things. Maybe this will be an easy deal, kind of like Venezuela, where we went in, and I mean, that was, you would have to say that was a phenomenal success for anybody wanting to overthrow a nation. It was a bloodless, you're in, you're out. I mean, not entirely bloodless, but for the most part. This had absolutely no comparison to Venezuela. Just in no respect was there the faintest comparison between this. And so we still remain in this posture where, on the one hand, we know in order to crush Iran, we're going to have to play loose with the laws of war. We're going to have to attack the Iranian people and just cause such enormous bloodshed and suffering that they eventually give in.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can compromise. But that's kind of where we are, and we have created a Rubik's Cube for ourselves where this is a great dilemma. Before we went to war, before Israel started this war, the Straits of Hormuz were open. Iran wasn't really attacking anybody. They were at peace. And we launched a Pearl Harbor against them. And now everything has sort of turned upside down for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I had hoped that we would come up with some reasonable compromise and put this thing to rest, and the world could move on from all of Israel's wars that they keep dragging us into. But at this point, the Iranians are beginning to look at this as an American war. I mean, this is the dream situation for Israel. Is they promote wars and then they sort of fade into the background, and it ends up being, the U.S. We attacked Iraq with absolutely no basis for it whatsoever, but Israel wanted it. We attacked them, over this weapons of mass destruction claim, and then who even thinks about Israel? Nobody thinks about Israel's involvement. It's the U.S. The U.S. did this.
I would say maybe, I guess, Americans are not thinking about it, but in other countries, that's they kind of see the big picture. Where we did the memorandum of understanding, said yes, of course, it includes Israel. Israel must cease its attack on Lebanon. And Israel comes out and says, no, thank you. And we're not moving from the southern Lebanon. We're going to continue to occupy it. And Iran, who signed this memorandum of understanding, understood what that meant, but was not being followed through by the U.S. And so therefore you have this this not in good faith effort to seek peace with your your other opponent, if they're not willing to hold the feet to the fire of their allies, because that's, we are allied with Israel in what was understood in the memorandum, where they were supposed to cease these bombings. They're continually going into civilian areas, leveling them. We remember the preposterous terrorist attack they did on Beirut, where they bombed it over 500 times in less than 30 minutes. It was completely outrageous what we had witnessed. Civilians that continually perished. I think they're continuing to conduct themselves in a manner where, while we're allied with them, we do not appear to be good faith actors. Either we play the way Israel plays is continually just so dirty. They target civilians on, basically on a daily basis. And so we continue to ally with them. We kind of appear to be in that same manner.
Yeah. No, I don't think that that President Trump wanted Israel to continue their attacks in Lebanon. I think all the White House, the Pentagon were all in agreement that we wanted Israel to stop. Israel is not an ally of the United States in any traditional sense. We work with them because they control the money that funds our federal elections. And we work with them because there are Israeli agents in all the offices in the halls of Congress. And it's a strange arrangement. It's an arrangement rather than, an alliance. You think of countries working together. We go into the attack together, but when it comes to peace, Israel's just made the decision, and Netanyahu has been very upfront about it. And of course, his cabinet, he's got this Ben Gvir, incredibly monstrous fellow, who, the whole power group in Israel has been quite clear. They have no intention of trying to help us make peace. Yeah. And they're going to continue fighting, even though we have agreed that we're not going to fight.
Well, to kind of draw in perspective some of the level of depravity that they are willing to go to continue their annihilation and their ambition of just land grabs, I should say. There was this report that came out in the Haaretz. Now, we'll talk about this, and this will be a good shift to talk about our elections. Israel is also having elections this year in October. So they had this report by Haaretz where you had generals confirming that the IDF ordered the Hannibal Directive on October 7th, which the Hannibal Directive is it's mainly attributed to soldiers. So if soldiers get kidnapped by the adversary, in this case it was Hamas, that the IDF is supposed to also in not allowing there to be negotiation efforts, and they murder the IDF soldier as well as the Hamas militants who are, capturing these people and kidnapping these people. They extended this Hannibal Directive to the Kibbutz Be'eri and what was the concert that was happening? It's leaving my mind with the festival that they had that day, which were civilians. So this is an image of the cars that we were told the Hamas militants who came in on paragliders with just, I think they had, handheld weapons and maybe something a little more powerful than that they were capable of doing this.
It shocked Hamas that they had the success that they did, because they had anticipated that there would be a lot of resistance. There'd be some sort of a clash. Maybe they could make a breakthrough somewhere and create a little mayhem. Yeah. And they discovered that, the border was, almost undefended. And I think that's probably not by accident.
Yeah, it appears to be so. And I think that 3 years after the event, we're starting to have a trickle of evidence that is coming out by, I would say Haaretz they do a lot of good reporting. They did good reporting on some of the doctors, American doctors that came back, some of the GHF workers who were against the actions the IDF were taking when they were trying to feed the Palestinians. And then this reporting as well, where they had documented evidence of different generals and people lower in the IDF who were completely appalled by the orders that day to just shell whatever they could. There are reports that the Hellfire missiles that the planes that were firing the Hellfire missiles had to go back and reload numerous times during this day. And I say this because in the Knesset, you have the Likud party, who is heavily in control right now. And that would be considered like the alt-right of Israeli politics. This may stand to hurt them. We know prior to October 7th, you had massive demonstrations that were going against kind of the power grab that Netanyahu was doing. And then you have this. And so I kind of want to say that. And then while we pivot to the U.S. elections, we have this engagement with Iran. You have the U.S. who elected in overwhelming numbers, a President Trump who came out and was stating that he would be the peace president, no new wars. He would go on these campaign rallies continuously and saying that if you vote for Kamala, that we'll have World War III. And, here we are 2 years into his administration, and there's no ending in sight of the Ukraine-Russia war. We're continuingly to provoke and not take a productive stance at asserting that we want peace in this Iran conflict. And I would say that we've kind of regressed back to the no surrender ideology that we were talking about when this very first happened, and Trump put out that tweet, nothing but, complete surrender by Iran, as opposed to when we know diplomacy, when you have these peace negotiations, both sides are supposed to be very, very unhappy with the outcome of how they are finishing this conflict. And we're not seeing the U.S. kind of move significantly from recognizing the true power that Iran has exerted over their complete blockade in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, it's something. I know it's frustrating to our viewers, just as it's frustrating to us, to discover that we've sort of found ourselves in a box that we can't escape from. You'd like to just, let's do this, do that. Now, the suggestion has been made by some that what we need to do is just leave, that we need to take the fleet out. But I think we're actually doubling down. I think there may be additional naval forces going in. So we just seem to be wrapped around the axle, which, and for us, I mean, there's more to America than overseas wars. There are people in America who, they want to find somebody to fall in love with. They want to get married. They want to have houses and children, and
the simplicities of life, not anything grandiose. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, their lives are not focused on killing people on the other side of the planet. And so so we have our midterm elections coming up. Midterm elections are when we elect or re-elect every member of the House of Representatives and 1/3 of the members of the U.S. Senate. The way the senators are elected for a 6-year term, and the way it's staged is that roughly 1/3 of them are up for election in each 2-year term. So, apologies here. This is what we're faced with, and it's going to be very important because it's going to determine all kinds of basically the way that the U.S. Government will function for the final 2 years of the Trump administration. And so in any normal situation, at this point, I would say with all of the wars and so forth and all the negative news, there would be just a wipeout for Republicans. I'm very familiar with what happens when you have a war that turns unpopular because I was in the Virginia House of Delegates when people began to question the war in Iraq. Now, before this, just like I ran 13 very hotly contested elections, and I won 12 out of 13. But the one election that I lost was in the Virginia House of Delegates, and it was when Code Pink, the Democrat organization Code Pink, really got organized, and they got after the Republicans because of the war, and we knew we had a rough election coming up, but we always had rough elections, and it really startled the Republicans, the aftermath of our elections here in Virginia, where I lost my seat partly because I was the most prominent, really military person in the House of Delegates. I was retired after a 32-year career in the Marines and the Army JAG Corps. And But not only did I lose my seat, but there were five Republican members of the House of Delegates in Northern Virginia who all kept their seats with a margin of 1% or less. So they all squeaked through the entire slate. And this was because of George Bush. A couple of years before then, if you said, "Hey, what about that George Bush?" the crowd would roar and applaud. Oh, he started these wars. What a great thing! And then it turned, and nobody was saying, "How about that George Bush?" People didn't want to say the term George Bush anymore, and so I went down, even though I was probably more anti-war than anybody that was on the Democrat side, but that's just the dynamics of it. So we're in that situation now where,
Yeah, I would say it's very different too. I would say when we were going into Afghanistan and Iraq, there was this I would say more popular view of doing those engagements just the way that the country was. I don't think there has ever been a majority of people that were for this engagement in Iran, even from the very beginning.
it's very peculiar. I don't know of any historical precedent for a major war being fought where the public opposed it from the beginning. Now, the opposition wasn't real organized, but everybody just, oh gosh, another war
Again,
and here, the administration's touting, oh, we're the administration of peace. Look at all these places we've made peace. And honestly, I study this stuff enormously, and some of these conflicts I didn't even know they existed. And we were claiming, oh, well, we did this, some place wherever in Ubangi, outer Ubangi, we've just solved this thing. Well, meanwhile, we're fighting two gargantuan wars, major wars. We're fighting the war in Ukraine, and we're fighting the war in Iran. And meanwhile, we're in other hot spots all over the place. I mean, we're really in a frenetic period of conflict that it's a little bit reminiscent of a book that I studied as a young fellow called The March of Conquest, where it charted the early days of the Second World War and the various movements of German troops in Europe, where there were a number of the countries that were being attacked, and Germany overwhelmed France, and Britain was on the back foot, and it was sort of the very, very successful part of the war for Germany. And really what we're doing in the Middle East is a little bit reminiscent of that same type of thing, this feeling that, well, we can do it. We've got a better military, a more modern, bigger, more funded. And we're all of a sudden, it's almost like what happened when Germany turned and then fought its war against the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden things started going downhill. I think we have just sort of overplayed our hand, and we've got to extricate ourselves from all of the warfare, or we're just going to bankrupt the country morally, financially, and in so many respects.
Yeah, I think, well, let's, transition to the election. And you're talking about right now, you have the executive branch and the legislative branch are both held by Republicans in a majority. And we're experiencing this, continual lull into more financial ruin, just continual war, and not really any fulfillment of any of the major promises that were delved out to us during the 2024 election. I
I
think that.
sort of take issue a little bit because some of the issues have resulted in some enormous success. And for example, the border was, I mean, it may have been the number one issue in a way. Spectacular success. The focus on American energy, tremendous success there. There are all sorts of these, but they're sort of pushed into the background because of these other things. Americans also said, okay, we want an end to the war. We want more fiscal responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe more of a biased take for me is that those two are very important to me. So seeing that kind of not being fulfilled kind of is very disappointing in that sense, because that is, Republicans kind of exert okay, we're going to be responsible with the budget, and it seems like it's just continuing to a balloon. I don't think Doge really had any effort. I guess it got rid of the USAID, but there's like talks about how it's also like money's kind of still being funneled through there, and that's kind of where I guess I come from. So that's a fair, for you to come back and say that, but that's kind of where I come from, is those two are very important to me. And those seems like it's not, making any kind of headway of, rolling back some of the debt that we have. It kind of seems like we're exerting the debt. We talked about now the Pentagon budget's $1 trillion. And
it's going to go up to roughly $1.5 trillion.
Yes.
So there's been this enormous bubble of spending, and you cannot do this indefinitely. You can't just say, oh well, we're going to do COVID spending and we're going to lavish money all over the place, and then the next day you turn around, oh well, we're going to do this enormous gargantuan increase in Pentagon spending. At a certain point, the whole thing threatens to collapse on us.
Which I think that is kind of what it is. I think in order to address the problems seriously, in my point of view, I'm sure maybe you diverge from my opinion on that, is that there would be significant consequences for everyday Americans while we correct the ship. And I don't think any representative wants to be have that tied to them, where you can have it manipulated, saying no, they ruin the economy, when you are really trying to make a solidified effort to improve it. But in order to do that, you really have to. It would require some hurting, I think, just by the sheer amount of debt that we've accrued. So,
the hurt always goes to the ordinary people.
Yeah, so I think that is a large part of every representative. It's more of a kick the can situation because they like their job. It's a very cushy job. You get you get off a lot, and that's just how my point of view of things are. But I know that you in your some of the notes that you send me is some of the hot seats that you're looking at that might the Dems must win or Democrats are most vulnerable in. So we're going to talk about that. I know that something came out recently in the news about the election in Maine, where you have Graham Plattner, who won probably, I think it was an historic primary, probably the most amount of people came out to him in record turnout for, I think it was like 76% of the vote he won, which was unheard of. He is now dropped out. So I think that they have until today, actually, to kind of find a new person to take up the charge. And I don't know if they have. I haven't really looked into it that aspect. But we can talk about that. We just put up a map earlier of kind of the states that you had mentioned. If you want to kind of talk about that, and then we could talk about Graham Plattner. And I think that you want to also talk about some of the education that's happening in America.
Yeah. Well, the situation with Plattner is very interesting because the one thing that's dogging the Democrats to some extent is they're not vetting their candidates. They're not, examining their background sufficiently, and so you're getting all of these really bizarre people who are being nominated because there's such anger in the ranks that they just won't change. Plattner was an interesting guy. He had a little sort of on again, off again military experience. He held himself out to be an oyster farmer, but really his only client was like his parents. So he didn't do anything. He's typical of so many Democrat leaders that they have never really had any occupation other than just being a political activist. And that's a problem because they don't really know how to relate to real live working class people anymore. But anyway, so Plattner has dropped out in Maine. Maine looked like their biggest opportunity to win a Senate seat. Very hard to win these Senate seats. And with Plattner dropping out, they're going to have a completely unknown figure who emerges, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, Maine went from being, the great hope of the Democratic Party for the Senate to where now it looks like a long shot. So the way that the Senate works, the Republicans have the majority, and all of the pundits recognize that there are these must-win seats. They have to win Maine, they have to win Ohio, Alaska, and North Carolina. Now, in some places, their odds are better than others, but very, very difficult to win all four of those. Very unlikely that they will. And additionally, they have to hold all of their vulnerable seats in Michigan, Georgia, New Hampshire. So I would have to say, we've got under 4 months left before the midterms, and the dynamics within the Democrat Party are very complex and difficult for the Democrats to work through. They have traditionally liberal Jewish candidates have emerged and been very successful taking the lead for the Democrat Party. So you have Chuck Schumer, the Senate leader, and Jewish, very, very pro-Israel, backed by AIPAC, and so you have lots of members of Congress and so forth who are Jewish members and very tied to AIPAC. And then you have this tremendous upswelling as the Muslim population grows in the United States. There's this conflict because you've got Israel slaughtering people overseas. And so this anti-war movement in some ways ends up turning on Democrat members of Congress, just like it goes after the Republican. Very difficult situation for them. Now, so for the Republican Party, things are not looking good. People are not real happy, but the Democrats are in a pickle too with their, this infighting that's going on. So we'll see where that ends up. I would say that it's a very remote possibility that the Democrats will be able to get it together and win the Senate. Mm-hmm. The House is another matter. I have this kind of uneasy feeling that it'll be a little bit like my election back in 2005 when the Republicans kind of woke up and suddenly discovered the power of the anti-war movement to swing the edge to their side. But here, there's this fellow Evan Smith. He's a Democrat consultant, and he recently got a lot of news within the Democratic Party because he said that what's going on in the midterms this year is, for the Democrats, it's going to mirror what happened with the Republicans with the Tea Party. And back when the Tea Party rose up, they got a lot of organization, had a lot of political power behind them, and just devastated the Democrats. This year, Evan Smith is saying that
Republicans,
the shoe's on the other foot.
mm-hmm.
But the problem that he also pointed this out. He said that the hardcore Democrats approve of their Democratic congressman by only a 47% margin. In other words, now this is Democrats who disapprove of their Democrat leaders by a majority. And he pointed out that the approval rate of Democrats for their congressman is lower than the view that Republicans held of the Democrats back then. I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a record low approval rating of all representatives across the board, just because of what we've experienced in my lifetime alone. I think I think
very tumultuous and sort of unpredictable at this point what's going to happen. But
we talked about that shift of how the representatives are supposed to be public servants to kind of this new ideology that they are kind of above the population that they are supposed to represent, and that we're coming at right at the 250th anniversary of America, which is it's a country in its infancy. We're supposed to kind of repivot and find out what our founding fathers truly envisioned this country to be, and they talked about that the power of a government must be derived from the consent of the people, consent of the governed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To give your consent, one must have either be also proactive and progressive at the how they're being represented. In order to do that, you would need to be highly educated, have critical thinking skills, and be able to assess what's best needed for your community. And we are now experiencing times where the American population is significantly failing at being highly educated. You sent me something that I think we want to kind of pivot and talk about, which is how college students are testing and what grade level they're testing, which is completely crazy. And so would you like to pivot to that story? I know we have a little bit of time left.
Let's do that. There's a story out of the San Francisco Standard, and their story is about the University of California at Berkeley, which at one time was pretty highly regarded school academically, and what they did is, back during the George Floyd racial uprising, with the Black Lives Matter and Antifa and the burning of buildings and all, a lot of institutions were intimidated. And one of the things, there was sort of this crazy notion of this DEI idea that somehow it was racist to expect minorities to meet various standards, intellectual, academic standards. And so you had this widespread, I mean, for our top universities, they dropped testing, the Scholastic Aptitude Test. And the SAT test traditionally has been
Mhm.
somewhat of an IQ test. Um, uh, reflected with what do you know? Do you have English skills? Do you have mathematics skills? Do you understand science? Do you know a little bit of history? And what they did is they said, well, okay, the problem is we're not getting the right racial makeup. And so we're going to do away with the tests because the tests are obviously racist. And so you had MIT, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, they all dropped their testing. And those institutions have brought it back. Most have brought it back, but it still is not administered at UC Berkeley. And it has become so bad that there are significant numbers of freshmen entering the classes at UC Berkeley who cannot do basic multiplication, things that typically, we all learn in the third grade of elementary school.
Mhm.
And because of the George Floyd thing, the idea was that it was somehow racist to even expect minorities to apply themselves. That that was a racist thing. And so as a consequence, now there's no measuring rod to see who is suited to higher education. And so it's gotten so bad at UC Berkeley. Now, this is a very liberal institution. And despite that, 2/3 of the entire UC Berkeley mathematics facility have signed a public open letter asking for return of the SAT testing. Now, it was Janet Napolitano, who was the president of UC Berkeley back in 2020, when there was a big testing task force that had studied tests and how fair they were, and they recommended keeping the test. And Janet Napolitano said no. She went to the Board of Regents and she asked the Board of Regents to phase out the SAT test. Now, Napolitano was Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, you would think, a very responsible person. And yet, she lacked the common sense to understand that students have to have some minimal intelligence if their college degrees are going to have any meaning at all.
Yeah, I would say maybe like the intention was, it was good intentioned to, because I think the case that this reminds me of is, our mutual friend Jose, who runs for office up in the Bronx,
Yeah.
which is the Congressional District 15, is the poorest congressional district in the entire country. You have a lot of children who go to low-income schools. With poverty also comes a lot of like broken homes. Parents are working a lot, trying to make ends meet. So you don't really have this cohesive structure that a lot of children need in an environment to kind of create basic critical thinking skills and good habits of studying and engaging the mind. There was this program that the Bronx had at these Title IX schools where they would teach the young children chess. Where a world ranking chess holder would come in and he would teach these children. And throughout the years, it showed a correlation between the children who continued to take chess and be in that program scored higher, were able to get into really good colleges, were able to move out of the Bronx and have very, very well-paying professional jobs. And I think that kind of shows that the implementation of something that allows them to dive into their creative mode, and that really builds their mind. Something like chess, who is a very, very skillful game, is something that could be rather looked at as opposed to just getting rid of these tests. I think that kind of is a more of a beneficial method to institute at these areas that are testing way below the benchmark that were needed. Something like that, it may be instituted, because the program actually ended up being cut from the Bronx, and here we are still kind of with the Bronx having very low test scores. And
Yes.
the article that you sent me, it's not just the Bronx, it's the entire nation that has experienced this free fall into not meeting the benchmark of their age. This article that you sent me, where college students are now testing at a 10-year-old level. I believe it's a majority of American citizens read at a 6th grade level, which is alarming. So I think that instituting more of like a classical element that allows the brain to critically think in these methods like chess, which I'm just using that story because I met the teacher who ended up doing that, and the system was cut, and he was very upset about that. But he reaped great success from these children that otherwise would have kind of fallen into the same system.
Yeah, the problem that we have, and I was on the House and Senate education committees for a span of, well, it spanned 20 years, although it was total of, I was there for 16 of those. And we struggled to try to improve public schools. And we maintained the schools. I would say we didn't improve them greatly, but we maintained them. And then there was just, the Democrats took authority in Virginia, and this was after I had left, and there was just sort of a general collapse in education that took place, not just in Virginia, it was taking place all over the country, with basically the public schools have become so politicized and have drifted so far from basic academic studies that they simply fail a large portion of students, particularly in the inner cities. They're particularly bad there. And a parent, I don't care whether the parent is PhD educated or has a 3rd grade education. That parent wants the best education possible for their child.
Yeah.
I don't care whether it's somebody in the inner city living in a cardboard box, or whether it's somebody in a palace. They want their child to have the best education possible. Now, the problem is that they are prevented from having it because we don't have school choice. And so that's something we can go into in later time. Yeah. But in any event, that's what's causing the problem for the kids today. So,
and kind of what we allude to is the overwhelming, this snowball effect of ramifications, that where we have, the representatives not representing us, having this kind of emboldened take to not really be a public servant but the Lord, and it kind of comes from this lull of the population that, when November comes around, they'll go do their duty and vote, where they don't really have this proactive stance where they're understanding who they're voting for and who this person really is, and the ties that they have. Some of them have big money backing that kind of makes them have ulterior motives when they're representing them. And I think that's all that kind of wraps into kind of the issues that we see today.
Well, I guess we'll have to pick up next week and continue on. But in any event, thank you for being here with me and presenting a very human side of difficult issues.
Thank you, Senator. And I would encourage everyone to tune in next week to focus on the news. We had, a really good question today. I'd always encourage other people to, comment and ask us a question, and like and subscribe, and tune in next week to focus on the news.